Hi, everyone, and a very warm welcome to a very special episode of the Learn Partimento podcast. I'm very excited to welcome two very special guests to the program, Professor Robert O. Gjerdingen, Professor Giorgio Sanguinetti. Of course, Professor Gjerdingen is the author of Music in the Galant Style and Child Composers, while Professor Sanguinetti is the author of The Art of Partimento. They join me today for a group table discussion on Partimento, music history, music education, and much more. Gentlemen, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
Now, it's really an honor to have both of you on the show, and a little background is probably necessary for the many new fans of Partimento who might be tuning in. Music in the Galant Style was published in 2007, The Art of Partimento in 2012. Before that, there was research being conducted on this formerly little explored topic. Maybe the first thing we should talk about were the early days of Partimento research, and I just love hearing stories. Professor Sanguinetti, you mentioned talking to a librarian who didn't quite like people photographing sources. So there's there could be a lot of things that we could talk about in the early days. Maybe you can enlighten people.
I think that Bob can tell some stories about this as well. Yes, this is an old issue, and librarians, they tend to feel themselves as the owner of the material, so they don't like very much to let people pat their hands on it, and so they're jealous. And now there's a law in Italy, and they cannot refuse to take photographs of the material they have. But someone still does. So this is a big problem. Concerning the early days of Partimento research, I guess that maybe, I don't know if Bob agrees, but I think that the first scholarly work ever published in Partimento was the Partimento Spieler by Gustav Fellerer, who was one of the greatest German musicologists of the past century. And when he was a young graduate scholar, he wrote his Habilitationsschrift, which is something that is necessary for German people to teach in universities. And his first appointment was in a very lovely small town in Germany called Münster. And, Münster is the home of one of the biggest, probably the biggest collection of Italian music outside Italy. That is the Santini collection. And his first research was on the Santini collection, and he was very interested in this strange things called partimenti. And he published the Partimento Spieler. That is not exactly a scholarly book, but is an anthology of partimenti with suggestion for the realization, and with a very, very sharp introduction. And he added to the Partimenti of the Santini Sammlung also two partimenti composed by a nobleman, Graf Maximilian von Düsseldorf, I think, Holde Düsseldorf, who lived in a castle nearby Münster, in the Hauskirche of Münster. And he published, he never published Partimenti, but he wrote a manuscript of Partimenti. And this manuscript is still in the castle of the library. I've never seen it, but I'd really want to go and to give a look at this manuscript. And so he had the two of these Partimenti of Maximilian to the Santini collection. So this is the first scholarly work on Partimenti, and it's a very good one, very clever. And he was able to identify most, probably all of the problem of the issues concerned with the Partimento thing,
Wonderful.
I agree. Um, the the library at Münster must have had an anniversary or came by some money. They made a movie about their collection.
Yeah,
You
I
can find it
remember.
on Vimeo, and it's really quite good. It's like a Hollywood movie. And they show Santini, who was this minor Italian priest who came to Rome and fell in love with ancient music manuscripts. And he preserved some things by Palestrina and other great uh, earlier composers that no one else did. He learned how to copy this music from one of the last castrati in the papal chapel. I mean, it really was an adventure. And when he died, he willed his collection to the Bishop of Münster, who was in Rome at that time. And in the movie, you see this collection put on a wagon behind a horse and then hauled over the Alps up to northern Germany. Then, about 60, 70 years later, the important English musicologist Edward Dent went to Rome to look for the music of Alessandro Scarlatti, and he couldn't find much of any of it. And they told him, "Oh, it's in Münster." It was on that wagon. And so Dent goes up, and in this tower in Münster, he finds these works by Scarlatti and all these partimenti. And in one of the works of Scarlatti was a note from Franz Liszt, who
Wow.
had
Really?
played that manuscript. And then, even more amazing, by the end of World War II, everything around the library was a pile of bricks and
Oh,
dust.
wow.
And the library had survived. The only problem was that in the late 40s or early 50s, they had a flood and they did lose a lot of the letter P
Mm.
from the collection. But
Wow.
anyway, it's an amazing tale from an Italian priest who fell in love with old music to trip by horse across Europe to a safe place in Münster, and then finally one of the founding figures of English musicology, and then later of German musicology, happened on this collection, and they both were amazed and just studied it like crazy.
Can I ask how you two met?
Oh, well, that was in Rome. And I think it was, when was Bob? 2004 or 5?
Maybe.
You
I mean, I was the classic American tourist. I'd gotten so excited about Partimenti and these things. And of course, everybody said, "Oh, you've got to talk to Giorgio Sanguinetti," and they were absolutely right, because Giorgio had been working on Partimenti for a long time before I got to it, and I was so ignorant of so many things. I mean, give you an example. When I went to an Italian music library and I saw the word segnatura on the call slip, you have to put in a little slip to get a book. I thought, well, that must mean signature. So I signed my name. It actually means call number. Okay. So I would turn in these slips with my name where the call number was supposed to be. And the lady behind the counter, she looks at this. She shows it to one of her friends. She says, "Oh, look at this crazy American. He knows nothing. This pazzo. Look, George." No, they say, "Fredo, come look at this." So I had this whole group of laughing library workers. Okay, now contrast this. When Giorgio goes into the same library, his wife is a friend of the head librarian. The ladies see Giorgio. Giorgio is a cultured, handsome Italian man, and they just say, "Oh, Giorgio, take what you want. Whatever. What can we do for you? Would you like some coffee, Giorgio?" So I really depended so much on the connections of Giorgio when I got to Italy for the first time.
And when was that? When did you go to Italy? The very first time? What year was that?
Well, I think Giorgio's right.
2004 or
5,
5.
maybe.
Okay.
I was quite worried, because a colleague, a friend of mine, who happened to be a colleague of Bob, Jesse Rosenberg,
Yes.
He speaks Italian like an Italian. So, and his wife is Italian too, and so he came to Italy quite frequently. And he told me when I told him that I was working on this train stuff called Partimenti. So he told me, "Oh, there's a colleague of mine in Evanston who is interested in Partimenti too." So I went into panic because, when a scholar finds out that some other colleague is working on the same field, it might end up quite badly. But then I met Bob, and Bob is the most wonderful gentleman in the world. So we found quite an agreement on which field is the field on which we had to work on, and it turned out quite well, I guess.
It turned out very well because both books, the music in the Galant Style and the Art of Partimento, both were feted with the Wallace Berry Award. And could you guys mention your reaction to receiving that award from the Society of Music Theory? Maybe you could go first, Professor Gjerdingen, because you won it first in 2007, I believe.
Surprise and delight, of course, but mostly surprise because professional music theory took a very esoteric turn in the 1970s, and it became somewhat mathematical, and it would be too strong to say it was divorced from the music, but at least it was not something that a practical musician could find much interest in. I think that's fair to say. There was a lot of interesting work, but it was quite technical and not something. I mean, if you had a 7-year-old prodigy and you wanted to teach them something, that's not the something you would teach them. So I was really surprised that the Society for Music Theory was interested in something that was quite practical, originally completely practical, but that had interesting theoretical side to it. Understanding how children could learn, how professional musicians would work out a system of musical communication that didn't really involve words. So, it was. I think it was a turning point, because in the first years when I tried to interest people in this music, it was a very hard sell. I felt like I was a door-to-door brush salesman, and I would get the door slammed in my face every house I went to. And then suddenly there was this positive reaction. Giorgio, how about you?
Well, I was awarded the prize when during the conference in Charlotte. I remember it was in 2013, but I wasn't there because I didn't go to every and all of the conferences of the Society of Music Theory, and I wasn't there. So I started receiving weird messages from my colleagues and friends, and even a video of the speech delivered by the president of the society when they said that I was awarded the Wallace Berry. And I remember that I wrote to one of the most enthusiastic was Susan Ryan, who was the music editor of Oxford University Press at the time, and I was very surprised. And I told her, "But how could I get the Wallace Berry? I didn't apply for them." And she answered, "We did it, silly." I really didn't know. I really didn't know how it works.
Professor Gjerdingen, you alluded to some difficulties in the theories being accepted prior to the award. Maybe you could just elaborate on that. What was the state, or rather, what was the orthodox position on music theory in that period? I guess before in the early 2000s, and right now, I think people take for granted that Partimento is now this thing that everybody studies. Now, universities around the world are picking it up, but it was not at all something that was on anyone's radar at the time.
Yes. Well, there's a lot of backstory to this, and I don't know even where to start. There's an element of racism that has infected the field of music theory, and it's not because people are racist. It's just because they inherit ideas from their teachers and going on back. And the United States, in terms of its music culture, its classical music culture, inherited the music culture of Great Britain. And Great Britain had, as many people know, although a lot of people don't know this in America, they had a German royal family. And so, when Queen Victoria could play the piano fairly well, and she would sit down and play forehand music with Felix Mendelssohn, speaking German to him. Most of her relatives were German, and the promotion of German culture was very strong. I mean, our Christmas trees come from England, adopting them from Germany. Anyway, by the time you get to the early 20th century, there is a little bit of a dark side to this, in that white America did not consider Italians completely white, especially not Southern Italians. It just sounds terrible to say this today, but it was true. And Naples is in southern Italy. So the idea that there could be anything of significance in this area of lesser people, I think it didn't enter people's minds. So, for example, courses in the history of music theory in the 1960s and 70s were, even in the 1980s, were entirely about French and German and English sources. They would be Italian sources as long as they were in Latin. But then when you get to the 18th and the 19th century, there was just a complete hole opened up, and nobody read about these things at all. Now, I'm sorry if there's Mendelssohn. Very good. But anyway, again, it wasn't that American scholars were in any way anti-Italian. They just didn't know that they were. It was something that they inherited and hadn't really thought about. And then, of course, it didn't help that, as Professor Sanguinetti has shown in a number of articles and in his book, that the Italian tradition in the 18th and 19th century was nonverbal. It really wasn't written out. It was a musician's tradition. And so when English and American scholars read about the history of theory, they only read what was written. And so there was a big gap. Well, I've gone on too much, but that gives you an idea of, I had a very important American music theorist after one of my talks come up to me, and we were talking about Galant music. And he said, well, that's not really music, is it?
Wow.
So it was just a an inherited view of the world, in that the history of music, even though every fast movement says allegro, okay, it doesn't say lebhaft, it says allegro. Even though the reality of music history went so clearly through Italy for so long, the Anglo-American view of music history was greatly influenced by German musicology, and it's fair to say that the Germans invented the modern university, and its influence was very strong on the history of music theory and the history of music generally. Now that's been rectified, I think, in large part, but that was the background into which I found myself when I started, and thank heavens it's changed a lot. I think there's something. How should I put it? When you're studying and talking about something that's both fun and beautiful, it's not the worst thing in the world, and eventually people they'll join you because it is fun and beautiful.
That cultural change is so astonishing because if I'm reading the history from Professor Sanguinetti's book, if you were in a royal court or if you were in a large church, you wanted one of the top Italian composers in the 18th century to work there. And that was the culture. You wanted them all across Europe because they were highly prized. Professor Sanguinetti, can you talk about perhaps prior to your book winning the award, what was the landscape like for you? I know you mentioned your professor introduced you to Fenaroli at the beginning, and you found it quite interesting that it's not a name that was common in Italy at that time.
Well, no, it was common. Many people remember Fenaroli, but it was considered something very old-fashioned and something childish, even. A compliment to what told Professor Gjerdingen before is that the same thing happened in Italy too. So in Italy too, not only Italian musicians, but especially Italian men of culture and the ruling class of Italy during the 19th century really despised music as something unworthy of the ruling class. The first minister of education in the unified Italy, Cesare De Santis, wrote a very influential history of Italian literature. And when it came to music, he said that music is not for gentlemen, it's for petty women.
Wow.
Per donnette in Italian, per donnette,
Wow.
petty women. And this was in some way, this is still the idea that many people many cultured people in Italy, I mean, think at an average, well-educated gentleman or gentlewoman in Italy, they will be ashamed to admit that they don't know anything about Dante or Latin literature or Raffaello, but they gladly admit that they know nothing about Beethoven or Verdi or music, because music was considered something lower, something less important. And this is a cultural divide we still are fighting in Italy. Everything happened in the beginning of the 19th century when the German introduced music in the university, when the University of Berlin asked Mendelssohn to take a position as a professor of music in Berlin, and he didn't accept. And he said that he recommended a Marx instead. And so Marx went and taught classes about music, even music theory, not just music history, music theory, to young people. And belonging to the upper class of the Junker. And you can imagine those people just coming out of a class of Hegel and then listening to a class of music. So this was a problem for Marx too, who had to invent a way to teach music at such a highly refined level of sophistication comparable to that of Hegel. And so Germany and German people developed this idea that music is something important, as something that belongs to the high culture. In the meantime, Italian music at the end of the 18th century decided to become a monoculture, so to devote exclusively to opera. And opera is something more related to amusement, than to culture, to higher culture. So it's closer to the show than to the philosophy book. And this created a huge divide between the German consideration of culture and the consideration of German music from other culture, such as British and later American culture, and the consideration of music from the Italian culture, and obviously the idea that other culture like American and British and German had about Italian music. So it's more fun, more show than culture. And this is a problem we still have to fight. I can just point an example out. In Italy we have a lot of you know of monument of beautiful churches and there is a guide. The most complete tourist guide in Italy is that of the touring club. So the touring club, the red guides. So there are a booklet for each and one region of Italy, and in this booklet, every single church of every single village or small town is described very, very precisely. So they describe every stone, every painting, every fresco. But when it comes to the organ, maybe a wonderful organ built by great organ builder in the 16th century, not a single word, because it's a musical instrument. So it's music,
Wow.
so it doesn't matter.
Wow.
And we still have to fight with this. But now, obviously, now the situation is better. But still, this is a battle that the Italian Musicological Society has been fighting since the foundation, from the foundation of the first Italian Musicological Society in the beginning of the previous century.
Gentlemen, we talked about the 19th century. I actually want to go back into the beloved 18th century, which is such a wonderful thing to talk about. It's almost a joy to talk about the 18th century because there's so much amazing music and the culture. I'm very interested in, and I've realized this over just in my way learning Partimento, they thought differently about music in such a distinct way than how people think about music now and the way people conceptualize music. I'd like to ask, first of all, let's talk about Partimenti. I'd like to talk, people, I think one of the interesting things about Partimenti is that almost everyone did it, which was that, and nobody knew that, and nobody realized that this mysterious activity was being performed by everyone. Could we go to someone like, now somebody who's new to Partimento might ask, well, what about Bach? Does Bach have anything to do with Partimento?
I'll take that one to start. But yes, there's an entire collection of Partimenti from Bach's circle. It's unclear whether, I mean, the title is Partimenti of J.S. Bach, but of the word di of in Italian can mean by or used by or known by
or owned by.
It's not clear. Yeah, or written by. So what it suggests is that these are small Partimento fugues in what's called the Longlots collection, and they were probably studied by Bach when he was at his uncle's, and or used by Bach's own students. But they're not great music. They're I think they're not as elegant as some of the Italian Partimento fugues, but they are clearly there at the early in Bach's life and used by his students. So the answer is yes for Bach and Partimenti.
That's astonishing. Do you want to add anything?
Yeah,
to that, Professor?
there's also a few partimenti written like the Neapolitan did in the last volume of the Neue Bauhausgabe, and the volume called Works of Uncertain Authorship. But they have the BWV number, so they have been recognized as works of Bach. And I think this is an article of Sebrennikov about this. I've read it. But they are there, so probably there are more. Because I think that now they are redoing the Neue Bauhausgabe from, it was the second edition of the NBA, so they found out more. But I think that the issue of German Partimento is still open, and there's much more to find. A very exciting finding was a few years ago. I mean, after I published the Art of Partimento, I wrote in my book that Alessandro Scarlatti wrote very excellent, very good Partimenti, but in a small number. So we had a couple of manuscripts from Alessandro Scarlatti. Well, a few years later, a huge collection of Partimenti by Scarlatti was found in Paris, and that collection came from the private library of Friedrich Chrysander, who was a German musicologist, and is currently, it's currently housed in Hamburg, in the University Library of Hamburg, not in Paris, I'm sorry. And a student of mine made a PhD dissertation on this as a complete edition of this really beautiful Partimenti by Alessandro Scarlatti. And the interesting thing is why and how they found their way into the private collection of Chrysander, who was a friend of Brahms and one of the greatest musicologists in the second half of the 19th century, the greatest German musicologist in the second half of the 19th century. So this is still unclear. But the fact is that in German music education, when it came to practical musicians, German used Partimenti. Of course, they also wrote treatises because it was, a sort of tradition for German to write and to publish big, hefty books. But when it came to, the actual work of music, they used the same thing that Italian used, that was Partimenti.
Could I quickly bring up Handel? That's another famous composer a lot of people know. What's the connection with Partimento and Handel?
The studies for Queen Anne, or Princess Anne, sorry, are very Italian Partimenti. And of course, it's worth remembering that Handel spent some time in Milan, I think. Is that correct?
No, it was in Rome.
Rome, okay.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Yes, Handel spent a number of years in Rome at the beginning of the 18th century as court musician of the Orsini family and other important family. There's even a painting of young Handel when he was in his 20s, is in a painting of young Handel attending to a fabulous ceremony, a feast in the Baroque Rome. And he was a friend of the very wealthy and powerful families. And he went in the countryside to their castles in the Roman countryside. And there is a small village outside Rome where the organ was played by Handel. There's still the organ played by Handel. And what is interesting is that the Partimenti for Princess Anne of England were written, they are totally independent from the Neapolitan tradition because they were written after Handel met the Roman people who wrote Partimenti, most importantly Pasquini. So they reflect a Roman and I'd say also German tradition, because I say German because the way they're organized according to the kind of chord. So first triads, then what we call triads in first inversion, and then 6/5 chord. This is something that Neapolitan never did. They never organized their manuscript in according to the kind of chords. But Handel did, and I think that this is a German trait of his approach, and combined with the Roman approach of Pasquini, especially, was the most important. Maybe also Scarlatti. They were the leading Roman composer. I mean, Scarlatti is Neapolitan, of course, but it was in Rome at the time. So.
Another very popular composer for the piano that gets he's very popular. I think Horowitz played a lot of his sonatas, and that's Domenico Scarlatti, and he's the son of Alessandro Scarlatti. So, I mean, it must be obvious that there is a Partimento connection there. But could we speak on Domenico Scarlatti?
Bob?
Giorgio?
Okay. We're bouncing balls each other.
It could be my ignorance, but I don't believe there's pedagogical material that survived from the hand of Domenico Scarlatti. He probably used his father's material and that of other masters in Naples.
Yes, I agree. But among these 200 and something Partimenti in the Chrysander manuscript, there are many that closely resemble a Domenico Scarlatti sonata, only written in Partimento form. So I think that connection might be this, but there are no Partimenti by Domenico Scarlatti. Maybe there are. I didn't see it, but maybe there's a Partimento collection in Milan, written by the brother of Domenico. He had a less fortunate brother. I think it was Giuseppe Scarlatti. I'm not sure about the first name, but I guess it's Giuseppe Scarlatti. And there is a manuscript of Partimenti by Giuseppe Scarlatti in the Noseda collection in Milan. I didn't see it, or maybe I saw it many years ago. I don't remember. I didn't take the picture, at least.
I learned from Professor Adam Merta-Burson, apparently Giuseppe Scarlatti, was that him, Giuseppe? Somebody who was Partimento trained went to Turkey and was part of
this was the brother of Donizetti. Giuseppe
Donizetti. Right.
He became the musician of the Sultan of.
That's amazing.
And if you go to Istanbul, in the fanciest neighborhood of Istanbul, the Pera, this the biggest 5-star hotel is called Hotel Donizetti.
It's amazing that the reach is so far.
It was Giuseppe Donizetti,
yes.
not the Botfab.
Okay, so how about Haydn?
Well, just
go
a
ahead.
second. Let me follow up if I can.
Of course.
Just very quickly. that at the Paris Conservatory in the 1840s, an assistant professor, we might call him, Hippolyte Collet, C-O-L-E-T, he published a 340-page book on Partimenti, and it includes a lot of Italian Partimenti. And he was writing to four students that did not know the tradition. And so what he said is, to realize a Partimento properly, the ideal kind of realization would be like a two-part invention by Bach or a Scarlatti sonata, Domenico Scarlatti sonata. And because you could not buy these things in Paris at that time, he published a dozen Bach preludes, or two-part inventions, and about a dozen Scarlatti sonatas. So at least the idea that the sound of Domenico Scarlatti would be an ideal form of realization of a Partimento was still alive, 100 years after Domenico's life.
I hope everyone who's watching is noticing we're going through every composer, and there is a connection with almost with every composer to Partimento. Let's talk about Joseph Haydn. What is his connection to Partimento?
Giorgio?
Bob?
Well, it's rather complicated, and we don't know all the details. Giorgio, help me if I get this wrong, but Haydn was a choir boy, and he would have had some instruction at the St. Stephen's Cathedral in Vienna. Now, his usefulness as a choir boy ended when his voice changed. And so, really, you might say in a career way, he was on the street after his voice changed. He had to make a little money here, make a little money there, but he didn't have any full-time position. He was renting rooms in the same house in which Porpora lived, and the great Neapolitan master Porpora. And Porpora had a kind of protege, a young lady he was taking care of named, is it Martinez?
Yes, Mariana Martinez.
Yeah, younger Martinez.
Probably she was her mistress. I don't know.
Yes, it's uncertain, but she was a very fine musician. She took lessons from Bono, who was the head musician in Vienna at the royal court, at the Imperial court. Anyway, to make a long story short, Haydn gave her harpsichord lessons, and Porpora gave him composition lessons. And a composition lesson by an Italian master at that time must have included Partimenti. And Giorgio has found a collection of Partimenti in Milan, I believe.
Yes, and this is part
that
of
says
the story.
Partimenti of Porpora. But
yes,
and Giorgio, you should take over at this point.
Yes, and I said it's a part of the story you told about my connection with the librarians, and the librarian of the Library of Milan. I remember when I walked into the library and she knew about my interest in the Partimenti. They were dismantling a trunk in the basement of the library with the material of an old teacher, of counterpoint teacher, who happened to be the guy who wrote the vocal score of Verdi opera for Ricordi. The name was Saladino, Michele Saladino. And they were dismantling this trunk. And she found a thing that she thought might interest me. And she came to me, and then we have found this thing in the trunk of Saladino. You think it's interesting? And there were the only known collection of Partimenti by Porpora. So we found the smoking gun connecting connecting Haydn, and not just Haydn, but the Viennese classicism to the Neapolitan tradition.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's amazing. Wow.
Yeah, I knelt down and kissed her hand.
That is an incredible find. Wow. And now, of course, the big one, of course, Mozart. What is the connection with Mozart and Partimento? And I know he even had singing lessons, I believe, right? With the Neapolitan castrati. Is that what happened? Please go ahead and tell me about the connection with Mozart.
Bob.
There's no smoking gun there like for Haydn or with Porpora. But for example, well, as you know, every slip of paper that Mozart ever touched, almost every slip of paper has been preserved and published in deluxe editions. And from a very early point in his life, there are scores of the local church musician, I think it's Eberl, Eberl, and there's scores of some church music by Eberl, and some of it is written out and some of it is just in Partimento style. So clearly Mozart grew up in this tradition, especially in church music. You know, the organist would have just a figured bass score, but sometimes they would be required to realize it, you know, in between the, like for an antiphon, there would be a choral part and then a instrumental part and that. But there's, to my knowledge, there's no collection that says, you know, Partimenti by Mozart. There was a collection that was destroyed in World War II that was a set of Partimenti for two players by Salieri. But as far as Mozart, I don't know of any particular manuscript. He did write solfeggi, by the way.
Yeah, he visited Naples, and he was a friend maybe it is a big word, of the only German composer who became a teacher in the Conservatory of Naples, Giuseppe Doll, or Joseph Doll, who was a young musician from Bayern who traveled to Naples and became a student. I don't remember, probably of Cotumacci, but I'm not sure. And later he became a teacher in Naples. When the Mozart father and son traveled to Naples, and Doll was the trade union, because he obviously spoke German, and between the Mozart family and the world of the Neapolitan Conservatory. So it was the guide of the Mozart. But I think that Mozart was much well acquainted with Padre Martini in Bologna, who, by the way, was also a Partimento composer. From a slightly different tradition. The tradition of northern Italy is not like is quite different from the Neapolitan one, but still there was a strong connection between the Bolognese school and Partimenti, and Mozart can be considered a pupil of Padre Martini, I think. No doubt.
Would he have been aware of the Neapolitan conservatories in the 18th century?
Who? Mozart?
Mozart.
Of course, he visited them. He visited all of them. Yes.
Wow.
Yeah, I should mention also that in Geneva, Switzerland, there is a manuscript of Partimenti. Well, it's a rules manuscript, a regole, by Joseph Dole, and there are a number of what Giorgio has aptly called concerto-style Partimenti, where there's clearly a tutti and then a solo, and the solo is written out for both hands. And what you see in Dole's Partimenti is that, well, beginners may think that Partimenti is a little bit like figured bass, that you see a note in the bass and you play a chord in the right hand. But when you see the written out solos of these concerto-like Partimenti, Dole's are very elaborate, and they're pure harpsichord music. I mean, they're fast runs, arpeggios. It requires a very nimble player, and it makes it quite clear that at least an advanced student was expected to do much more than chording. Chording was just like the entry level, and then you would move on from that to making real melodic expression.
Yes, that's true.
Shall we move on to another composer, Beethoven? He's, of course, one of the most famous composers of all time. People would be gobsmacked to know if he had any Italian connection.
Giorgio, why don't you take that one?
And I should mention that Professor Sanguinetti wrote a book on the piano sonatas of Beethoven as well.
Yes, in Italian, but in English, I wrote a chapter on Beethoven Studies 4, and exactly about this topic. So the Partimento connection of Beethoven. Still, the situation is very much like Mozart. So, of course, he was aware of the tradition. Of course, he studied solo bass. And he was also aware of Rameau and the theories of Rameau, and he was interested in his library. There are records of many theoretical treatises. The most intriguing thing is that his name is placed in the list of subscribers in what still is the greatest Neapolitan Partimento collection ever published. So they call the Composition d'Italie by Choron, Alexandre Choron. And it is a huge 3-volume work, extremely expensive. So usually when it's an in folio, so it's very, very big. I mean, there are books like that, really big. And when books were so expensive, the publisher or the author asked for a subscriber. So they want to secure that there were money enough to publish them. Nevertheless, I think that Choron went broke publishing this book, ruined his fortunes. It was really expensive. So, and the name of Beethoven is listed in this, I think, 6th or 7th position in the list of subscribers. However, the Choron was not found in any of the most important document of Beethoven library. So the catalog of the sale made by the Beethoven belongings after the composer's death. But I was told by the librarian of the Beethoven house that they have acquired a copy of the Choron 3-volume work for their project of reconstructing Beethoven's original library. So the Beethoven House of Bonn, they believe that Choron was actually in the possession of Beethoven. Someone thinks that there was not. But I cannot imagine a guy writing the name of Beethoven just for fun. I mean, Beethoven was not the kind of person who could accept something like that, I think.
would be a good time to switch. Oh, would you want to say something, Professor Gjerdingen?
Oh, well, just the Charon is 3 volumes in folio size, and folio is the size of the New York Times. So we're talking about a very big book covered in leather, all right? It's really a deluxe proposition, subsidized by Napoleon, I believe. Anyway, I remember looking at a version of it in Milan, and after going through a few hundred pages, I looked at my fingers, and they were black. And I realized that this was ink from the time of Napoleon. When I got back to the States, there was not an online version of this at the time. And I wondered, how could I get this again? And I looked online, and I won't name the library, but an American university library had a copy. And I clicked on in a little checkbox, and then I clicked on another checkbox, and I clicked on another checkbox and closed my browser. And a week later, this 210-year-old massive volume shows up in my mailbox. They had put it in the post. So I called him up and I said, never do this again. It's too valuable.
Let's switch over to the Paris Conservatory now. And for people who don't know, I mean, that was really something that really it was amazing for me to learn. But the Paris Conservatory has a connection to Partimento and Italy, and maybe we could talk about that. And Professor Gjerdingen mentions that in his book, Child Composers. Professor Gjerdingen, you want to talk about the link with the Paris Conservatory in Italy?
Well, I think it's fair to say that the French had a kind of national image of Italians as being musical people. I think the British also shared this. And so when you wanted to be a fashionable prince or duke, you hired Italian musicians. I think you mentioned this. And this went all the way up to the top. And so there were efforts in France to bring Italian educational methods to France itself. The first formal attempt at a high level was a royal school of singing. And then, unfortunately, the revolution happened, and all the people that paid for music education had to leave the country or were killed. And after a while, they ran out of musicians for military bands. You know, they were fighting wars all over Europe, and they needed military musicians, and they'd run out of them. So the National Guard actually set up the Paris Conservatory. I mean, it's a lost kind of history, but it was a sort of wartime invention. But again, because of this idea about the importance of Italian musicians, a number of great Naples-trained Italian musicians were on the early committees to set up the conservatory, and were on a kind of board of overseers. And, when the question came up, well, what should we teach? Basically, the answer was, we should teach what they teach in Naples and Bologna and Rome. Let's get some of those professors. And if we can't get the professors themselves, let's get some of their students. Maybe there's some French students of them. And so the conservatory was staffed with Italian-trained musicians. And they took over the whole curriculum. I mean, there wasn't a French curriculum, really. There was a little bit of theoretical ideas from Rameau, but even one of the early theorists of the conservatory said, well, yes, Rameau, that's all very nice, but we don't really teach that. They taught partimenti. They taught counterpoint. They taught a course called harmony, but harmony really was keyboard harmony, where you realized partimenti. And in fact, one of Claude Debussy's personal friends mentioned in a a book, a 20th century book about Debussy, that the phrase was, yes, he won a first prize playing Partimenti in the class of Auguste Basile. And so I was amazed that even the word Partimenti was still being used at the Paris Conservatory at the very end of the 19th century.
So even in Debussy's time, who is considered a very modern composer, the word Partimenti was being used in the conservatory.
Yes, yes.
It's incredible.
Now, it had been largely replaced by the words given bass or given melody, like basse donné or a chant donné. But yeah, every so often they would use the word partimento. And Giorgio, why don't you mention this story from the very beginning of your book about
Yes.
André Caplet?
Yes, Caplet was one of the winner, the top prize winner of the Prix de Rome, and being the winner of Prix de Rome means that you could stay for 2 or 3 years in one of the most beautiful places in Rome, Villa Medici. And when he went to Villa Medici, he was charged by the top guys in the Paris Conservatoire. So the director was at that time, I think, Paul Vidal,
Dubois.
maybe. Dubois.
No, Dubois. Yeah.
Yes. So by Dubois and Paul Vidal and some other people, I don't remember it now, the name, to go to Naples and to find some other manuscripts of Partimenti, and they gave him a manuscript thematic catalog of the Partimenti they already had in the library of the conservatory, and the thematic catalog is still preserved in Paris. I saw it, and so he went and he asked the librarian of Naples if he could get the greatest number of possible of Partimenti hand copied and sent to Paris. And he said, of course we'll do, and he never did. So there is this quite dramatic exchange of letters between Caplet and Vidal, and Rocco Pagliara was the librarian. When Caplet was really desperate about getting this manuscript, but they never gave him. So I wonder why. One possible explanation that, this is insider. This is just for insider. We don't want to share it with other people. This is one possible explanation.
When Caplet got to the Paris Conservatory as a student, he had been a student in a regional conservatory, and then sort of graduated to the top conservatory. And his composition teacher was going to be, I think it's Xavier Leroux. And Caplet writes to his parents, telling them about his first days at the conservatory. And he told them that Leroux told him, do some of the Partimenti at the back of Bazin's harmony book, and then we'll see what you know. And I own a copy of Bazin, B-A-Z-I-N, Bazin's handwritten copy of Saverio Matte's Partimenti from Bologna. Yes. Matte was a protege of Padre Martini, I guess. And
yes, he was a student of Padre Martini, was the teacher of Rossini and Donizetti.
That's right. And so the idea that, that one of the two top harmony teachers at the Paris Conservatory would be copying out an entire book of Matte Partimenti in the 1850s, it's really kind of remarkable. And of course, the abilities of these people, it's always worth mentioning that they were amazing. I mean, André Caplet, for example, is not a widely known name anymore, but the year that he won the Rome Prize, was the first year that Ravel competed. And so we're talking about a guy that beat Ravel in a fair fight. I mean, some of the later contests that Ravel lost were kind of rigged, and it created a scandal. But yeah, he beat Ravel in a fair fight, and he was very good. Some pieces by Debussy, I think, that are orchestrated by Kaplan.
Yes, that's true. That's true. Les Martyrs de Saint-Sébastien, I think, was orchestrated by Kaplan.
Okay.
Can we jump to the Russians? Is there any influence of Italian composers or music in Russia that we know of?
Well, let me take this first. From the time of Peter the Great until the son of Catherine the Great, so in other words, from the second third of the 18th century until about 1814 or 1815 or something like that, every music master at the Russian court was either Naples trained or Italian trained.
Wow.
It was 100%. Naples trained Sarti, Sarti, went there. And after he left the royal court, he started a music school in Russia. And of course, he would have taught exactly like he was taught himself. Paisiello, who, was Napoleon's head musician and the head musician of Catherine the Great, he did the first Barber of Seville. I mean, he was much more famous than Mozart at that time. While he was teaching the future Tsarina, the future Empress of Russia, he published an entire edition of Partimenti and rules. In fact, it's the first complete edition ever published. Is that true, Giorgio? I think so.
Of Neapolitan Partimenti ever published, yes, because probably the edition of there was one earlier of Basili, I think. That's a few,
Basili, yes.
Yeah, but Basili was not Neapolitan. So yes, it's correct. It's the first Neapolitan collection. I wanted to add also that Paisiello was so famous that an opera of his was played over again in its entirety. So was encored in its entirety. It's the only time that this happened in the whole history of music, that you encore an opera from the beginning to the end. And this happened in Vienna in 1792, so 1 year after the death of Mozart.
Incredible.
Yeah, so in a nutshell, the history of Russian classical music, not Russian folk music or anything else, but Russian classical music is entirely Italian in the program of Peter and Catherine the Great to westernize Russia. The setting up of the palaces in St. Petersburg and bringing in Italian musicians, French dancers, many other things. But it was part of a conscious national program. And so at that time, Russian classical music was very Italian. Now, from the middle of the 19th century, it starts to have much more German influence. German technology, I'm sure, was very attractive. And even, you might say, nationalist Russian composers like Rimsky-Korsakov, when they wrote a harmony book for the conservatory in St. Petersburg, it was heavily influenced by German music theory at that time. Now, behind the scenes, okay, in the unprinted part, there was still a lot of Italian material being produced. And so Rachmaninoff's teacher, Arensky, published 1,000 harmony exercises, and they're in all but name partimenti and melodies to harmonize. and many of the same patterns. Yeah, many of the same patterns were reproduced, and so the practical side of this was very Italian. Even the study of Stravinsky with Rimsky-Korsakov had a rather Italian flavor to it, although a lot of it we don't know exactly what he did day to day.
Yeah,
That's incredible.
And if I might add, also the big melody, the big tune in Tchaikovsky Pathetic Symphony is entirely made with Galant schemata. It's a hertz, 2 hertz, and a Fonte. So, so the influence was still huge.
So, gentlemen,
Yes, it really was.
before I jump to the final topic, which is music education for today, I do want to bring up someone a little bit earlier in the 18th century that Mozart might have known, which is Joseph Riepel. And perhaps, Professor Gjerdingen, you can talk about music schemata as perhaps a concept that is historical, because Joseph Riepel did talk about these things in the 18th century. And could you talk about this in relation to the music schemata that you have mentioned in music in the Galant style?
Sure. Well, practical musicians have always been aware that they knew certain patterns that they could pull out of their hat whenever they needed them. And the word schema, for example, is used in Heineken in Dresden already in 1711, I think 1716, is referring to something similar to the rule of the octave. But what makes Joseph Riepel unique is that he actually names these things and tells you what the names are. And that was unusual. Most of these things never had any special names, not like names like you'd name a horse or a dog or something like that. But Riepel did that. The three most famous are Monte, Ponte, and Fonte. And in Riepel's translation of these Italian terms, a monte is going up a mountain, and a fonte is going down a well, and a ponte is going across a bridge. Now, he probably got these words from one of his teachers, maybe Zelenka, or maybe somebody connected to Galeazzi in Venice. But anyway, Riepel is a sort of wild and crazy guy, you might say. He writes a stream of consciousness of about 1,000 pages about 18th century music. And he's writing mostly for non-musicians, so he rarely puts down more than a line of music. In other words, he'll give you a bass, but mostly he'll give you just a melody. And what's very helpful is that he'll present a pattern, and then he'll show many ways in which it could be used. And so Riepel's writings are a kind of testament that practical musicians, he was a Kapellmeister, in other words, he was a music director at the court in Regensburg, and it shows that they knew these words, if not the words, the concepts. They knew the feeling of these patterns, and they taught them to their students.
Wonderful. And so for the last topic, gentlemen, is music education for today. I just would like you to relate the reaction to your research. Could you tell my audience and things that have happened in the last few years? Have you noticed an increase in interest from younger conservatory students, teachers around the world? Have you received feedback from your work? And what's the landscape look like for music education moving forward?
Giorgio?
You first?
No, you first.
Well, of course, there's a huge surge of interest in this topic. I mean, the Galant schemata, Bob's Galant schemata, has changed the entire landscape of music theory. It was a really epoch-making change. Nothing is the same as used to be before. And so I think that this book is probably the most important book published in music theory, maybe in 50 years or so. For what concerns Partimenti, yes, of course, there's a great interest around. And the research, too, has developed so fast that many things I wrote in my book are no longer true, because I myself wrote after the Art of Partimento went out about, for example, the origin of Partimenti, a paper in which I explained that I said that Partimenti originated in Rome, probably in the beginning of the 18th century, but later I found a manuscript of a composer, very important Neapolitan master, Francesco Mancini, with extremely complex and developed Partimenti with hyperchromatic harmony, and with the date 1690 something. So clearly they were around much earlier than I supposed. So, but so I thought, and I was musing with the idea of a second edition of my book, but now I realized that what people really need, and what teachers and what students really need, is a practical guide to Partimenti. So what was supposed to be my second edition will be an entirely different book, a textbook for classroom.
Oh, wonderful!
In which I will try to guide teachers and students from the beginning of the Partimento and the cadence, the rule of the octave, using practical exercises, and that will be difficult for me, a big website, because I'm not very good in doing websites, but I'll try to do my best with exercises, and because this is what is really needed. So a practical handbook usable in classroom. And so this is my project for the next couple of years.
Incredible. Wow. That's big news, everyone. The next big book coming out. Professor Gjerdingen, do you want to mention what you see as the landscape for Partimento in music education for the next couple of years? And also, please, can you talk about some feedback you've gotten for your research, and also I'd love to hear, what do you think about the Art of Partimento, the book that Professor Sanguinetti wrote?
Well, thank you, Giorgio, for what you said about music in the Galant Style, and I feel the same way about it. I feel the same way about the Art of Partimento. It provided a really professional, deep musicological foundation for scholars to understand what partimenti are. And, for so long, I've talked about how in the class system of European traditional society, musicians were artisans. That is, they were wonderful, but they were in the same social class as a plumber or a carpenter. They were people who did things with their hands or their voices, and they worked for wealthy people who made money with their brains or with their connections. And so, if you will, partimenti are traces of the world of artisans. And for a very long time, scholars thought anything that artisans did was really beneath study. Okay, I mean, you cannot find scholarly books on carpentry or pottery. I mean, by and large, not the craft of it. There might be something about a famous maker or something, but not the craft of it. And so what Giorgio did in his book is he showed how the world of artisans had a rich history, and that they spoke a kind of language of patterns, and that a young apprentice would enter this world and begin to learn simple patterns and then more complex patterns, and after a while could begin to speak artistically through these patterns to create emotional effects or joy or sadness or whatever in the patrons who paid for the work. I mean, if you think about the situation in Italy, there must have been more than 100,000 churches, maybe 500,000 churches. And practically everyone, a trained organist, sat there and made music for the people, at least once a week, and in some cases every day. So Giorgio really made a breakthrough in taking artisans seriously, and in seeing that the study of how they worked and how they made this music was really eye-opening. So, I just have the greatest admiration for his work, which, it should be mentioned, took decades. Giorgio did not sit down and just write this book. Okay, he spent probably 30 years doing the research for this.
No,
and he was
no, not so much. But I did a lot of digital picture. I mean, this book was possible because the technology of digital photography existed. Because otherwise, it could be very, very, very difficult to do things like that. When I went to Naples, to the Library of Naples, I made a campaign of photographs, and every day I took some 3,000 pictures. Wow. So I came back. I came home with a sore back and a load of picture to systematize, to catalog, and that was the fun part. I mean, it was like discovering a lost world. I felt like Indiana Jones in a way. That was really fun. It was fun. Yes.
Well, and I should mention a really crucial aspect of both our work is that everything we have, we give away freely. Giorgio gave me a hard drive with, untold number of digital images on it. And everything that I've ever created in any digital form is on the web, free for anyone. And, thousands of pages of things. By giving Partimenti away, we made them something that anybody could enter. This world is open to everybody. Sometimes scholars hide or try and protect their sources so that they have they're the only ones who can talk about these things. But I think a great idea with Partimenti was that it should all be free, and at least mostly free or reasonable. And so, here's a collection of Partimenti and all kinds of things. On that page of Partimenti, if you go back.
This is the new website, isn't it?
Yes, the new website. And look under collections. Version. Yeah, collection. And then go down and see Lorenzini.
Yeah, Roman.
Yes. So Giorgio was talking about Roman traditions. And this is, you have to get down. Yeah, it's really, it's a regole, it's a rules, but also it's a little different than Naples. And it shows quite an interesting take on the tradition. Anyway, once upon a time, it would have been very difficult to find this treatise at all. And now it's in parallel English and Italian. And, there are probably mistakes somewhere in it, but they're not terrible. And it's possible now to see things that, when Giorgio and I started, they were completely unknown.
Oh, yes, completely.
And we hope that other people will make their own studies of these things, because there's so much of interest. I mean, just recently I saw a large collection of Partimenti by Davide Perez, Perez, Naples born, Naples trained, even though he has a Spanish name. Remember that the Spanish controlled Naples for quite a bit of the 18th century. But anyway, he worked in Lisbon, and his Partimenti not only were well known in Portugal, but also in Brazil, because remember the Portuguese owned Brazil at that time. So this material extends into the New World. I mean, recently we found the very best manuscript, I should say, Faith Lanham, young American scholar, found what is probably the best preserved Neapolitan solfeggio manuscript in the 18th century in a girls' school in Mexico City.
Really? Amazing.
Yes. It has a lot of exercises by, just a second, it's escaping me.
Francesco Feo, right?
Yes. Thank you so much. Yes, Feo. And we assumed that such things existed, but there were no Neapolitan copies. And so there they are in a girls' school in Mexico City. It's really quite amazing.
Yeah,
another Italian musician, Cipolla, has bass exercises, really Partimenti, in Argentina, if you ever saw the movie The Mission,
yes,
I think it has a Morricone score. Anyway, they're from that school, which is to say, from the jungles. Back to the word jungle, real jungle this time.
Wow, incredible!
So, it's been amazing to see that. In retrospect, it makes sense that practical musicians, if they couldn't make a living in their home city, would travel. And by the 18th century, that meant you could travel to the New World. The son, I think, of Giorgio, who was the Neapolitan trained musician who was in Parma, did operas in Parma.
Bayer, you mean?
No.
Bayer, maybe no. An opera composer.
Yes.
He was an opera composer in Parma.
Fernando
don't remember.
Fernando Pear?
No. I'm sorry to bring up something that I couldn't come up with the name. But anyway, his son ended up in New York City, I think. And started a music school.
Oh, wow.
I'll have to look it up.
Yes.
Anyway, so the short, to wrap it up, it's just that this Giorgio's book really gave a firm foundation to the actual history of Partimento teaching and the Partimento repertory. And since his book has been published, younger scholars, even in the New World, have found that echoes of it are all over the place. Eastern Europe, Russia, of course, but the New World from one end to the other. So it's been quite amazing.
Well, fantastic.
Well, thank you.
And Professor Gjerdingen, do you want to mention what do you see as the future? We talked about younger scholars taking it up. Where do you see Partimento going in the next couple of years?
Well, there are a number of publications, like the one hinted at today, that I think will make it easier for young musicians to study some of these things. Job Eiserman's book on harmony and counterpoint in Partimento from the Amsterdam Conservatory is certainly a case in point. I think there are a number of YouTube videos from various teachers. There's a lot of work at the Schola Cantorum in Basel, Switzerland. A number of German conservatories are teaching this. There's been an important group of Partimento scholars in Freiburg, and who also teach at the Schola Cantorum sometimes. So there are centers, the conservatory in Amsterdam, for example. The great conductor.
This is even a Partimento conservatory in New Orleans, or in St. Louis.
Yes,
that's right.
yes.
And of course, the Birdsong Academy of Nihil was teaching
That's right.
Partimento as well.
It's quite literally around the entire world. And there's the Partimento Conservatory.
Yes, it's incredible.
Is that something that you would have envisioned 20 years ago, that this movement and this level of interest would have been attained?
No.
Absolutely not. No. I remember. I remember. I used the word printer to describe a particular pattern, and it's named after an obscure South German pedagogue from the late 17th century. And I remember being at a convention. A couple things were published out of order. So I had expected that I would have a source for the printer in the second publication. In other words, I could cite someplace. Well, the second publication came out first. And so I was talking about this printer, and this very distinguished American scholar came up to me and said, "Well, I've looked this up in 7 different sources, and what the hell is a printer?" And now it seems that everybody knows what a printer is. So it's been,
absolutely.
It's been very surprising to see how widely something became disseminated. But again, I think it's because Giorgio and I, Pedro Ventur, Nicoletta Paraschivescu, a whole lot of people doing this have been really generous with their materials and their time, and this is a party that anyone can join. When a little girl's father came to me and said, "I think my daughter could learn this," he was a noted linguist, and he understood how people learn language, and this seemed like a way to learn a musical language. Well, that was Guy Deutscher, and his daughter was Alma Deutscher, and I got to know her a little bit when she was 5 through her father. And by the time she was 10, she was playing with orchestras and had her second opera performed. No one ever envisioned that this kind of thing was possible. And so it's like there's Alma with this wonderful teacher, Tobias Kram, in Switzerland. Anyway, it turned out that partimenti are really powerful. And when you take a child's brain and expose it to partimenti, they turn into musicians. It's really amazing.
Yeah, that's true.
Well, what can I say? It's been a real treasure. It's been a real treasure of a time to talk to you two gentlemen. Thank you so much for your stellar work. And it's really been wonderful to hear. Actually, to have both of you on at the same time really is a real treat. And I think a lot of people would enjoy that. And I hope we can come back on again. And especially Professor Sanguinetti, you just mentioned your new book coming out. And for Professor Gjerdingen, I do want to mention, please go to partimenti.org. It is an incredible website, a lot of free materials that you can go and download on a variety of 18th century and 19th century related topics, as you can see here. Gentlemen, thank you for being on the show. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
Bye now.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye.